Hello, I'm glad you joined us today as we continue to study the Gospel of Mark. Today we pick up in Mark chapter 11, where we enter the last section of the book, where Jesus goes to Jerusalem and gives his life a ransom for many. The first 9 chapters, as we talked about, Mark deals with the Galilean ministry. Then chapter 10, as we just recently studied, serves as a transition as Jesus leaves the Galilean ministry and makes his way toward Jerusalem. Here we pick up in Mark chapter 11 and verse 1. It says, as they approached Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany near the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, go into the village opposite of you, and immediately as you enter it, you'll find a colt tied there on which no one has ever sat. Untie it and bring it here. And if anyone says to you, why are you doing this? You say, the Lord has need of it, and immediately he will send it back. And they went and they found the colt tied at the door outside in the street, and they untied it. And some of the bystanders were saying to them, what are you doing untying the colt? And they spoke to them just as Jesus had told them, and they gave them permission. And they brought the colt to Jesus and put their garments on it, and he sat on it. And many spread their garments in the road, and others spread leafy branches which they had cut from the fields. And those who went before and those who followed after were crying, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest. And he entered Jerusalem and came into the temple, and after looking all around, he departed for Bethany with the 12, since it was already late. Some other Gospels, they reveal that Jesus went back and forth during his ministry, and he did, from this Galilean ministry to Jerusalem, especially during the feasts and festivals. Here, this is the first time that Mark in his Gospel has talked about Jesus going to Jerusalem, and it's when he comes finally, as we said, to give his life a ransom for many. Even some of the details that are given by the other Gospels are omitted by Mark, but his account here gives us a beautiful picture of Jesus as king and being accepted as that. Until now, Jesus had really forbid his followers from proclaiming that he was the Messiah. His hour had not yet come, but now it was here, and he openly allows himself to be declared as king. They come from Bethphage and Bethany, just over the Mount of Olives, and from here he sends 2 disciples to a nearby village to get a donkey colt that he might make his triumphant entrance. Mark records the details that Jesus promised to the owners, that he would return the colt to them. And Jesus gives every detail as what they would find, and they go and they find it exactly like Jesus had said. And even in these simple instructions, we see the divine power of the Son of God. And I can tell you, as one who has ridden and broken mules and horses, I can say that the fact that a donkey colt that has never been ridden, who allows these disciples to bring it and cover it with their garments, and Jesus to sit on it and ride it, especially in a crowd of people who are shouting, it shows me that the divine will of God is being observed in these things as well. But he is Lord and King over all things, and he comes across the Mount of Olives on this donkey colt, approaching Jerusalem, and the crowd shows their homage to the king as they spread their garments on the road before him as though they were laying out the red carpet. They were cutting palm branches, and they were bringing them and placing those before him. They were saying in verse 9, it says, they went before, and those who followed were crying out, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming of the kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest. Now, Hosanna is a prayer. It means save now. And when they cried out, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, that's a statement that they were acknowledging that Jesus was the true representation from God. The kingdom of our father David, they said. This is an acknowledgement of the fulfillment of what God had promised to David, that through his descendants one would come and sit on his throne, and the splendor of of that time would be restored. Hosanna in the highest, they say. Now, again, this is a prayer that salvation that was prepared in heaven on high might descend upon the King and his kingdom. These were acknowledgments that Jesus was the Messiah that had been promised. He was the one who was to come. He was the heavenly King who was to come and establish God's kingdom. Jesus evidently not only allowed but encouraged this as he approached Jerusalem. The crowd was growing and praising. Many were going before and even following behind, and they were praising with these words. We're told in Luke's account, among the people are some Pharisees. They're in the crowd, and they realize what the people are saying and that Jesus is encouraging him. In Luke chapter 19, verse 39, some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." They realize that they're praising him as the Messiah. But in verse 40, Jesus answered to them there in Luke 19. He says, "I tell you, if these become silent, the stones will cry out." The time had come for Jesus to be recognized as the Messiah. And they were recognizing him as the Messiah, as King. But they have large misconceptions about what kind of Messiah he is. They have misunderstood what kind of king he has come to be. They recognize him as king, but they don't understand that he's come to be a king of a spiritual kingdom, a kingdom which is not of this world. Most were looking for a physical kingdom. They were looking for a king to restore the material glory and splendor of David and to release them from the tyranny of Rome. They were not looking for one whose purpose, as Jesus said, the reason he was born, the reason he came into this world was to bear witness of the truth that sets men free from sin. No, they were looking for a physical and material kingdom. It'd only be just a few days that these people, when they realized Jesus was not being the kind of king that they wanted him to be, they would be persuaded by the Jewish rulers to cry out, "Crucify him, crucify him," some of the very ones that were crying Hosanna and praising him as king on this day. But the manner in which Jesus came should have pointed out to them the manner of his kingship, the manner of his kingdom. The way to greatness in his kingdom, he's already pointed out, is to be humble and to serve. The way to go up is to go down, and he shows that for himself. He is the servant of Jehovah. He's shown that throughout his ministry. He's taught it in his teaching. And the prophets foretold this was the kind of Messiah he was going to be, the kind of king he was going to be. They were looking for the kind of king that would come on a large white steed and deliver them, as we said, from the tyranny of Rome. They wanted that kind of military leader, and that Jesus was the kind of king that the prophets had foretold. In Zechariah chapter 9, in verse 9, it had been prophesied, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, just as he is endowed with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, even the colt of the foal of a donkey." People were not looking for the humility and the service that would be found in this king. They were not looking for a spiritual king and spiritual kingdom. They were looking for the physical, and they would reject him and they would nail him to the cross. He was the Lord of glory, but they couldn't recognize that. Neither them nor their leaders could recognize him as such. They couldn't recognize the wisdom of God in his eternal plan being fulfilled through a humble, suffering servant. Paul would later say in 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 8 that the wisdom which none of the rulers of this age had understood, for if they'd understood it, he said, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. They simply don't understand what he's about. John began his gospel in John chapter 1 and verse 9, saying that Jesus was the true light, which coming into this world enlightens every man. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and those who were his own did not receive him. He came for light, spiritual light, and spiritual life. But that's not what people were looking for, and they would reject him. Though they are accepting him now and praising him and honoring him as king, they have, I can say, a lot of misconceptions about what his kingship is about. You know, it's sad that even many today are still looking for Jesus to come and establish eventually an earthly physical kingdom and to restore the physical Israel. Many premillennialists teach this, yet the Bible does not teach it. Jesus came and was king, was rejected by being crucified, but God raised him from the dead, and he still established his kingdom, the church. And he reigns and rules as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It's not that Jesus is going to be king. Jesus is king now. And you can't be a king without a kingdom. Jesus' kingdom exists now. It's a spiritual kingdom, which he says, which is not of this world. And he reigns and rules on the throne of David at the right hand of God, as Peter explained in his preaching at Pentecost. When Jesus returns in the final day, as Paul explains in 1 Corinthians 15, Jesus is not going to come to establish a physical kingdom and restore physical Israel. No, he is going to deliver up his kingdom, which is the spiritual Israel, the church. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15 in verse 24, he talks about when the end comes. He's talking about the final day when the Lord returns. He said, then the end comes and he will hand over the kingdom to God the Father when he's abolished all rule and all authority and all power, having defeated the last enemy, which is death. He's not going to come to establish a kingdom. He's going to take the kingdom which he established, his spiritual kingdom of the church, and deliver it up to the Father forever. And certainly that's going to be a time that we can look forward to and that we can cherish. Here, however, he enters into Jerusalem, and they're praising him, praising Hosanna, recognizing him as king, but yet terrible misconceptions as to what kind of king he would be. It'd be just a few days, and he would be rejected and crucified. And yet he's able to look beyond all the suffering and the pain to the glory set before him, when after the resurrection all power and authority is given to him, and he would establish his eternal spiritual kingdom for those who would come and submit unto him as the king. As Peter would say in Acts chapter 2, after his death, burial, and resurrection, let the house of Israel know for certain that God hath made him both Lord and Christ, this Jesus whom you crucified. This is what's going to come, and we'll look at that in future lessons. We'll stop there, and next time we'll pick up here in chapter 11. And I hope you'll join us then, and until then, I hope you have a good day.